Welcome to a very special episode of Norse Code. This is the 50th episode of the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, and I am here with our regular co-host and analyst. He is the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory, a contributor to Vikings Journal and the Daily Norseman, and he is Arif Hassan. How are you, Arif?
I'm good, and thank God that it's a special episode because we hit number 50, because when you said that, I thought we were going to have like a very serious talk about like the 1990s AIDS epidemic.
Well, I mean, we could still do that.
Or we couldn't. That's another option.
We don't have to. Joining us to round out the panel is our intrepid producer and tweeter-in-chief, James Pogatshnik. How are you, James?
Great, and I'm glad we're having a very special episode to talk about Arif's pill problem.
Wait, no, hold on. Let's talk about the phrase three-man pod for a second. That looked a lot better in the chat room than it does sound now that I hear it.
Well, what's weird about it?
Are you uncomfortable in here?
It's just a podcast made by three guys. It's just a three-man pod. Like, what's weird about that?
It's a human centipod.
Well, we're precisely how many seconds into the episode and we're done?
A human podcast.
Yeah, you're right. That does sound better. Also, there's another person.
Thank you and good night, Madison.
There's another person on the show, actually.
Oh, that's true. We will have a guest later in the show. She's a writer for the Atlanta Falcons SBNation blog, correct?
Yeah, the Falcoholic. And thankfully, she did not hear us talk about three-man pods or very special episodes about AIDS and pills.
No, it's not about the pills. It's about your problem with the pills.
Yes. Oh, okay. So we don't have to go into the details about the pills, just about how I'm hurting you all.
Exactly. I mean, you're so excited.
Well,
you're so excited. You're so scared.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, you're mostly hurting yourself, but that hurts us, Arif.
We're not mad. We're just disappointed.
So disappointed.
I really do think this intervention is more about you than it is about me.
Aren't all of them, though? Like, isn't just an excuse for us to pat ourselves on the back and having done so? Anyway, so Jeanna will be on later. In a testament to our increasing professionalism after 50 episodes, we managed to pre-tape the segment where they preview the Atlanta Falcons game. So we'll bring you that at the appropriate time. So before we get going, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. First of all, thanks to all of our listeners who continue to sponsor the show. Richard, I forget his last name, but Richard has donated in the past, donated again, just to say thank you for us noticing live that Jerome Simpson had been rearrested. You know, all this stuff, you know, the open container stuff. That happened live as we were taping.
Right.
We were just whatever.
The citation. Yeah, we were just like, oh, well, okay.
It's like, of course, whatever. So we went on, and Richard was like, you guys are real pros. You deserve to be paid for just getting on with life like that. Here's $10.
Hey, if Richard thinks we did a good job, we did a good job.
You endeavored to persevere, and that's what's important.
Indeed, we did. So thanks to all of our listeners for contributing to the show. You now no longer have to listen to us prattle on about Audible and FanDuel as our service, which is complete. We are free of the shackles of Blog Talk Radio forever. So here's the deal. If you were subscribed to Norse Code in the past, your automatic subscription probably won't work. You'll just have to go into the iTunes store and just search for Norse Code and subscribe to the one with the shiny new purple helmet. Alternatively, if you visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, in each of the episode pages, there'll be a link to the show's iTunes feed. So if you just go listen to an episode, you don't actually have to listen to the episode at norsecodepodcast.com. You can just click on the iTunes
you'd want to if you're subscribing.
Well, once you subscribe, then your iTunes will just automatically download it in the background and sync it with whatever devices you have hooked up in your little iCloud.
We're going to lose all of the listeners who accidentally subscribed because they thought we were Norwegian metal.
Well, we'll keep all the ones that subscribed because they accidentally thought we were Norwegian metal and then stuck with us because we were entertaining stories about pills and AIDS.
I suppose the opening of the show doesn't really help convince them that we're not a Norwegian metal show.
I mean, I suppose, yeah, so they just listen to it for like half a second and click subscribe? That's okay.
Yeah, no, the first 30 seconds actually could be easily mistaken for a heavy metal podcast. And then, I mean, actually up to 5 minutes. I mean, at this point, it could still turn into a heavy metal show. We haven't really, other than establishing that there is an interview with a guest about the upcoming Falcons game, we haven't really done much to prove that we are not a Norwegian metal show.
Well, thus far, I think our previous episodes do a pretty decent job of that.
Yeah. At any rate, all the issues with iTunes have been fixed. There is a new feed that you can subscribe to that will last functionally forever until the heat death of the universe is my expectation for the reliability of this service. And you can also subscribe to us on Stitcher, and there will be a great big Stitcher button on the episode page on NorseCodePodcast.com, probably in the show notes on Daily Norseman. We'll try to keep the link available for you so that you can subscribe on the old iTunes, get your Norse Code automatically, and stay hip to the latest news about your Minnesota Vikings every week. And actually, also...
Latest? I mean, it takes a while to get this podcast up. I'm pretty sure everyone heard about the Drum Simpson news before we talked about it to them at work at like whatever time they listen to us at work.
That's true. That was really kind of a zeitgeist moment, I think.
Now that we have sort of dated ourselves in the Twitter era of news, I don't know we can really call ourselves the latest, but the recentest analysis.
Well, and if not the recentest, certainly the best. The best you can get in podcast form, at least without assembling a knockout team of guests for your panel, which, we occasionally do.
Yeah, we do.
So my question to our listening audience is this. Do you feel like something's missing in your life? Do you feel like your life just isn't complete? I know what could fix that.
This isn't a dating plug, is it?
Is it a new hat?
This is not a dating plug.
I hope it's a new hat.
It could actually be a new hat. We could be giving away free hat. Free hat. So we're going to be out at I'm going to be out at the Vikings game this weekend at the Falcons game over at TCF Bank, and we have a plethora of Minnesota Viking hats to give away. Well, we have 3.
Yeah, how many is in a plethora, James?
Well, in this case,
it seems
it's multiple.
less than a plethora.
It's less than a plethora. It's multiple. We have 3 hats to give away, and I'll be using the Norse Code DN Twitter account to let you know where I will be located. And there's something special about these hats.
Oh no! What did you do to them?
I feel like it's only appropriate, since it's coming from Norse Code, that we give you a signature, something that you'll always remember. So we're having Arif sign the hats.
I don't know why you turned the metaphorical signature into a real signature, but okay.
Arif is signing the hats. We're giving them away at the game. So follow the Norse Code Twitter account, Norse Code DN, and we'll be doing that a little bit before the game.
Well, it is a free hat. It's not just... It is
a free hat. And the hats are actually halfway decent.
We should probably mention that they are Vikings hats. They're not just like, hats.
They're not
pillbox hats. They're not fedoras. They're not helmets. They are...
They're not Packers hats or anything.
They are new era 3930 Minnesota Vikings baseball cap style hats.
They are Vikings hats,
and they will be autographed by Arif Hassan. We will make the reporter more famous than the subject as we give away these autographed hats
for free. Free hat for 3 people.
Free hat for 3 at the Falcons game this Sunday.
So I think a game happened. I think I watched a game on Sunday.
I don't really know if you know what you saw, because in the show notes it says recap week 1.
Maybe I just wanted to go over the Rams game, which we won, as opposed to the Saints game, which could have certainly been worse.
You can be forgiven for that.
I suppose it would not really make sense for your show notes to follow it up with, what could have been worse. That Rams game went pretty well, if I recall correctly.
It went about as well as the Saints game did badly. Well, that's not necessarily true. We were firing on a lot of cylinders in the Rams game, and there were
get rid of the first and fourth quarter, and the Vikings are the better team. So,
well,
I don't see where you could go wrong.
So we have gone from a situation where if we just got rid of the last like 5 minutes of every game, the Vikings would be the better team. Now we have to omit almost half of the game in order for the Vikings to be the better team.
I thought Zimmer was supposed to change all that.
Well, the Vikings, technically, from a percentage perspective, are still a better team than last year.
Our defense is performing better than it has in years and years and years, at least ranking-wise. We're number 9, I think, in the power rankings on defense on Pro Football Reference.
Oh, in the DSRS?
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's great. If you take a look at, so, obviously it's only been 3 games, so it's not particularly great in terms of sample size for the statistics. So if you take a look at, drive stats, actually something very similar appears. So my favorite drive stat is drive success rate. I've talked about it a little bit on the show, but it's basically the percentage of down series that result in a first down or a touchdown. So basically, you have a drive success rate of 1.0 if you start out a drive and end in a touchdown. And then for every series where you end up punting or kicking, that counts as a failure. And so the amount of first downs divided by the number of chances you could have to get a first down or touchdown is your drive success rate. And that tends to be a very, very good, predictable way to determine defenses. And though this early in the year, there are some surprises, it does still suffer from a low sample size. It is still a slightly higher sample size than 3 games because it counts a bunch of drives. And Minnesota on drive success rate ranks 13th. Obviously not enormously good, but also better than average, which is way better than they did last year, which was consistently around 31 or 32. So that is an enormous improvement so far. In terms of points per drive, they rank 11th, which is even better. So that the defense has definitely improved, and that's pretty good given that 8 new starters this year. So that's pretty significant.
So the answer is yes, it could have been much worse.
Well, yeah, it could have just been the first 2 drives over and over and over again.
Oh God. So I got to do it on.
Would have been the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Atlanta Falcons.
Ugh. That's true. Is that what we have to look forward to this week?
No. The Falcons had, according to 538, which uses another tool that I like to use a lot, called game scripts. According to 538, it was like the 6th most dominant win in NFL history. And that's measured basically by taking the amount of points at the point differential of every second of the game and then dividing it over, all of the seconds in a game. And that gives you a basic understanding of how often and how ahead they are. So, a comeback victory, your game script is probably negative, which means that you were not dominant throughout most of the game. And in fact, you were probably a worse team that managed to pull it out. So from that perspective, it's the 6th most dominant win in NFL history.
I think until Tampa Bay scored its 2nd touchdown, it was the most dominant lead for Atlanta in franchise history.
Yeah. If you take a look sort of at how teams did, it actually is a little bit more varied than you think. So, for example, in modern history, like post-merger, the most dominant win was this Jacksonville win over Miami, and that sounds kind of weird, but it happened in 2000. So obviously it's a little bit different. But that Jacksonville team was not as good as you'd expect from having such a dominant win. The Miami Dolphins, who ended up losing that game 62-7, they ended up winning the AFC East and going to the playoffs. That Jacksonville team went 7-9. Obviously there are some really good teams in there. There's the 2009 New England Patriots beating Tennessee 59-0. The 1967 Green Bay Packers beating Cleveland. And then you've got some teams that were about to be good, about to be really good. but weren't necessarily that good that year. And so then there's the 1969 Oakland Raiders, which, they were a very good team, but they were a lot better in the years after that. So it's not, definitive that teams that do this are the most dominant team in the league, or even that they're necessarily good. You're more likely to do it if you're a good team. But I mean, you could have, the 2010 Oakland Raiders beating the Denver Broncos by a similar margin. They beat the Denver Broncos 59-14. Their game script was almost as dominant as Atlanta's. It's almost actually identical. And the 2010 Raiders finished 8-8. So, it doesn't. It means something, right? Because these teams generally are pretty decent or pretty good. You have dominant teams like the 2009 Patriots, the 2012 Seahawks, the 1940s Bears, 67 Packers. But then you've got like some meh teams, right? You've got that Jacksonville team I mentioned. You've got that Oakland team I've mentioned. So it means something, but it's not really replicable.
Well, so I got into it with a friend of mine on Twitter after the Saints game. And his claim was that the Vikings' real problem, notwithstanding the, nonsense call on Captain Munnerlyn and then the conspicuous no call on Joe Louis Breeze.
Seriously, that's so far that's play of the year, or moment of the year for Vikings fans. Just watching Breeze
for the Vikings, absolutely.
Yeah, watching Breeze get dropped onto his shoulders, not onto his neck and head, but watching that and then Breeze try to get up and try to fight the wrong guy who picked him up.
Let me get him! I'll murderize him! Let me get him!
And then Munnerlyn just goes, "You realize I did that, right?"
And he's like, "Are you my mommy?"
It's interesting because, most of Twitter was like, man, that's a horseshit call. And there's a couple of people, not necessarily Saints fans, who were like, no, that was the correct call. So Mike Pereira, former, officiating VP or whatever, was like, no, that's the right call. You're going to get that every time. And then you got a bunch of hate from a bunch of people, not even just Vikings fans. But then I got into it, right? So Darren Page, who's been on the show a couple of times, is like, yeah, that's a fucking terrible call. And then, somebody I follow, he's like a Cardinals fan. He's like not that, invested in either direction. Ended up saying, no, you have to call that because of the risk to the player. And I was like, what risk? He landed on his shoulders and back. That's where you want to land, obviously. And he's like, well, you have to call it because the process matters, not the outcome. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I agree with the theory of that, right? Because you can't just call a horse collar tackle when it breaks someone's legs. Okay, fine. But I don't think that the process of the thing was necessarily bad. And he's like, well, suplexes mean that people have a chance of landing, on the crown of their helmet or their neck. And I was like, okay, come on. First, there's no rule in the NFL that bars suplexes. That's not a rule. Second, you have to take a look at each of the individual tackles because it's not like a horse collar call, right? It's unnecessary roughness or whatever, right? And so you have to take a look at the process of each of the individual things and assess what the likelihood is of them landing on their neck. And there was a really low likelihood that he was going to land on his neck or his head. And he's like, what do you mean? I've seen that tackle happen a bunch of times when people have landed on their necks or heads. And I was like, no, you saw something that seems to. And so then we ended up talking about different kinds of suplexes. And then neither of us knew that much about wrestling. Like, it's certainly not as much as the two of you, right? And then somebody else, jumped in and was like, well, a German suplex, that's a problem. Josh Robinson did that to the Lions the other year. And so they should call German suplexes all the time. And I was like, hell yeah, if you say that. And
like, yes, what is that?
And well, I mean, I lived in Grand Forks, so I know what a German suplex is at least. But then he goes on and he describes the different suplexes, and he's like, well, it's actually this kind of suplex which relies more on torque and torsion. And I was like, yeah, he threw him over the thigh, and he's like, yeah, he threw him over the thigh. And so, because my argument was that the center of balance that he flipped was not that high, and so there's not a good chance that you're going to land on your neck or whatever. And he's like, yeah, there's basically zero chance that you're going to land on your neck. And I was like, yeah. So I won this debate through like this weird, not arbitrary, but this like weird micro-technical debate about different kinds of suplexes.
And you learned something about the belly-to-back suplex that day.
Yeah, that's what it... thanks, Dusty.
Hey, I used to get up early every Saturday to watch WWF Superstars.
Yeah, my brother did too for a while. Y'all were weird.
I'm just trying to imagine your brother doing that. It's not coming to me.
Well, I actually got into an argument with my brother when I was really young about wrestling. Because, he did the thing that all older brothers do to their kids and, like, ruin their dreams. He's like, that's fake, right? And I just blew up. I was like, why would you? No, of course it's not fake. Well, I obviously had, like, no evidence, right?
You had no way to know that it was obviously fake.
Yeah, I was like, it's clearly real. I mean, like, why would they do it otherwise? Which is not a smart question to ask.
Why else would it be on TV?
and because all of my friends were like, it's real. And in fact, my friend, because we were just in the about to be skeptical phase. I think I was like in 6th or 7th grade or whatever. And my friends, we were in these heated debates over whether or not it was fake or real. And, half my friends thought it was, thought it was real, and the other half knew it was fake. And so this is a very important topic to me because this is what we argued about. And he goes, no, you don't understand. I'm a wrestling fan, which, in retrospect, blows my mind. And he's like, yeah, we used to get wrestling magazines. It was like him and the other Dusty, or Dustin or whatever. One of the friends that you two had.
Oh yeah, D&D Dustin. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I guess he got wrestling magazines, and they like openly talked about how fake it was, which seems like this weird marketing trick, but whatever.
Hey, it works. There's even a word for it, kayfabe.
Yeah, which I later learned. Yeah, they have to like be in character all the time. That's frustrating.
It's exhausting. It gives you, as ludicrous as it seems to have this whole like mystery and artifice around professional sports entertainment, I guess you can call it.
Right.
It's an elegant art just for all of what it is, I guess. I don't know.
It's super demanding. I mean, the acting is obviously not, Oscar worthy, but the fact that you have to maintain these absurd soap operas for you can't break kayfabe.
Oh, that alone is Oscar worthy.
Yeah, that's wow. So yeah, that's what I learned about wrestling 5 years after that conversation.
So going back to the thing, Kevin argues that even without the controversial belly to back suplex and ensuing call that basically gave New Orleans a touchdown. So the real reason the Vikings didn't win this game is because we were unable to score a touchdown. Would you agree with that assessment?
That's kind of a bit simple, but yeah, sure. I mean, it's not wrong.
It just strikes me. I mean, you could look at it through the overly simple lens. Like, if only we had scored more points, then we would have won. I mean, yes, but I guess the larger point I'm getting at is that the Saints were able to kind of stop our offensive attack in basically all ways. We accomplished very little on the ground. Castle and then Bridgewater, even though Bridgewater looked great out there, which we can certainly talk about now that he has inherited this franchise basically for better or worse. He was still under lots of pressure. Had to make a lot of kind of sketchy throws, a lot of heads up play. We never really got a chance to execute an offensive game plan, I think, in this game, and consequently we were unable to score any touchdowns. And I mean, even if you take away the entire touchdown drive where New Orleans got the benefit of that call and then scored, we would still have lost the game.
It's frustrating, and it represents sort of a lot of the things that we thought could have gone right or wrong in that game. And the difference is if they had taken away a touchdown and on the ensuing drive the Vikings had scored 7 points. Then the Vikings are in pretty good position, because then it's a 16 to 13 game? Yeah, so then the Vikings are ahead. Obviously, that presumes that the Vikings score on the ensuing drive, which I think is a lot, right? But still, it'd be a 12 to 13 game if they only get away with a field goal. So, I mean, it's a swing. It's not as big a swing as I'm describing, but it's something that is worth considering. In terms of like the offensive game plan, I think a lot of it has to do with the running game, and I think. We've talked a lot about how, the running game is overrated when it comes to the way coaches talk about the game, when it comes to sort of how a lot of analysts talk about the game. But we have made one distinction, which is that if you have a good run success rate, it actually correlates highly to future winning and, current winning. And just a quick rehash, that just, means whether or not your runs are successful and how often they're successful. It takes away the impact of like 67-yard runs or 23-yard runs, but it increases the importance of like 4-yard runs. If you can produce 4 yards on a consistent basis when you're running, your running game is good enough to help you win games. And if you take a look at sort of the drives, especially those first 2 drives that, were pretty bad, you can see how, the Vikings through, some sort of other things were obviously involved. How the running game kind of limits the Vikings. First drive, they run for 2 yards on first down. They're forced to pass for the next two series, and they pass to Rhett Ellison. Okay. And that's incomplete. And then Matt Castle passes it incomplete to Kyle Rudolph, who appears to drop it, even though it was a pretty terrible pass. Then you go into the next drive. And the Vikings were able to march all the way to the sort of the New Orleans 22. And then because of a penalty, they have to go back. And it's first and 10, second and 10, and third and 10. And they can't do anything because they don't have an option to run the ball. So they keep passing. And every time they run the ball, they end up having to pass to compensate for the yardage they couldn't have gotten on that run. Second and 8, they run for 1 yard. Second and 17, they run for like 3 yards. It's frustrating because the fact of the runs is not that they didn't get explosive yards, which we wouldn't have expected. It's that the yards were not enough to put the Vikings into manageable situations where they could either pass or run and give themselves for the flexibility they need to convert third downs. So I think that's part of it. Other parts of it are, the fact that Matt Castle is not a particularly talented quarterback, and some other things happen in the game that you wouldn't even expect to happen. I mean, Kyle Rudolph didn't have a particularly good game before he got injured, and then after he got injured, I mean, you've got Rhett Ellison and Marquise Gray. Marquise Gray has been with the team for 3 years, and he's 3 weeks, and he's been with the NFL as a tight end for 2 years, a fullback for for 1 year. So, you don't have sort of the circumstances that you think are good for getting scores. Some of it's the running game, some of it's the mediocre passing game, and some of it's circumstance.
Well, luckily we won't have Matt Castle to kick around anymore. He has exploded his foot and is done for the year, officially placed on injured reserve on Wednesday this week. Mm-hmm.
I like the news story that came out where he thought all he had done is dislocate his pinky toe, and he went to the sideline and just like, pop it back in. They did the x-ray and went, oh.
How about that?
So we could pop it back in, but you're not walking on without a cast for a couple of months. It appears that your foot is in 1,000 pieces.
Yeah, he definitely did not. I mean, even if you don't take into account that story, he definitely didn't think it was a particularly serious injury. I mean, he walked back and he seemed frustrated that he was on a cart at all when they carted him to the locker room. Like, he just didn't look like he needed it. And then, of course, he obviously did. And so because of that, I thought his foot injury was, maybe hairline fractures on like some metatarsals or whatever. And that heals within like 8 weeks, which isn't great, right, for the NFL. But you can put him on IR designated for return or something like that. And the Vikings were like, no, that's not what we're going to do. So that happened. And that was not the only injury in the game to be worried about. One of the circumstances that I referenced is pretty big. Brandon Fusco, who last year was either the best or second best offensive lineman, goes down with a pectoral injury, which always a pectoral injury is usually a tear, and if it's a grade 1, he'd probably be back in the game. So it's a grade 2 or a grade 3. In grade 2s, you're out for 8 to 10 weeks. Grade 3, you're out for a year. So I'm not surprised he got put on IR. And then you've got Vlad Jacas, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but this is mostly a game recap than it is a preview of potential problems. We'll talk about that right after we talk to Jeanna.
This game strikes me as like the Vikings are kind of like the Confederates in the Battle of Manassas. or the Battle of Bull Run. A lot of guys left on the field out there, and not a lot really gained strategically from it. Is there?
I'm glad you included both names of the battle so that we didn't offend our Southern listeners.
Well, I know what football's about.
We're bringing in the Atlanta fans this time. We're trying to embrace new people.
Well, yeah, exactly. This is a recap of a New Orleans Saints game and a pre-cap of an Atlanta Falcons game. If I was ever going to call them the Confederates and not the Rebels, it would be this week.
The war of someone's aggression.
War of misplaced aggression. So are there any starters left not injured? I mean, I guess there's Cordero Patterson, but we never throw the ball to him anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, we're probably going to see a little bit more of him.
Yeah, well, we'll have no choice, right?
And Rudolph is going to be out for multiple games now as well. His groin is having some issues again. Was this just the sports hernia that he got in the middle of the preseason?
So he's worried about it's the same muscle, evidently, according to him. He said he was worried about it, I think, in the second week of the preseason, and then it just popped, is what he said.
Quote unquote, felt something pop. Yes.
Yeah, in his groin, which is not a wonderful place for things to pop unless you're planning for it.
Just be popping. Yeah, no.
Yeah, but the recovery time for that surgery is typically for athletes about 6 weeks, so he's not going to be around for a little bit. And that produces a couple of problems. So in terms of talking about the Vikings offense in general, I think this segues pretty well in regards to the problems that the Vikings have. So first, you have to talk about what this means for the passing game, right? So Kyle Rudolph's out, and there's not really a tight end that performs Kyle Rudolph's role. So both Ellison and Gray are more H-backs. Ellison is more of a blocking H-back who can perform the duties of a fullback extremely well. Is a good inline pass blocker. They used him as a pass blocker on a couple of sets, both in the regular season and in the preseason. And then obviously a pretty dominant run blocker, probably the best run blocker on the team for his position. Not an incapable passer, but certainly not someone you think of as a pass-catching threat. And so he'll have to perform some of those roles, but I think instead of having a player replace his roles, you'll just have a distribution of assignments that will, end up replicating some of the things that Kyle Rudolph is expected to do, and then some things you just can't do. You just can't expect to have him in the red zone, for example. You can't cobble together, the kind of player that has his skills in the red zone. I mean, sure, we might see Rodney Smith, for example. We might see Charles Johnson, who they just signed pretty recently, in the red zone because Kyle Rudolph is out. But that's not to say that A, they'll be running the same routes, or B, that they'll have the same kind of success rate because, not all tall players are alike. Marquise Gray is not a particularly tall tight end for a tight end. Rhett Ellison is not, good at boxing out defensive backs and linebackers in close coverage. So, you're going to miss that element. But the biggest issue, I think, is that the only person who's performing well in the run blocking game will now probably be asked to run block less. That creates a pretty big problem. So the next thing we were going to talk about is about Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata, but related to that, you have to talk about the offensive line. We all sort of know the kind of game, the kind of year that Matt Kalil is having. We'll talk about that in a second. Charlie Johnson is not a particularly talented run blocker. John Sullivan is a fine run blocker, but he's a center, and it requires a lot of double teams in order to make sure that things happen. And double teams require, the guards to do pretty well. And once you replace Brandon Fusco with Vlad Ducasse, I mean, he was probably the worst guard in the NFL. Last year before the New York Jets decided to bench him for a raw rookie from, I think, Kent State. I think it was Brian Winters. I think that's going to be a huge problem for the Vikings. I think Ducasse is not a starting caliber guard, no matter how. I mean, he looked surprisingly good in the preseason for what he was, especially considering who he was. But that doesn't mean I think that he's ready to play. And then Phil Lodeholt, I don't think he's having the kind of year that he had the last 2 years. And so with Rhett Ellison out, now you've only got one good run blocker on the line, and it's a guy who I don't want to say you scheme to run block, but requires other good run blockers in order for sort of the synergistic ability of him to block well. And that creates a big problem because Matt Asiata is not a creative runner. He's not going to get you more yards than your line is going to get you. And as we've discussed on the show, he in fact gets less yards than your line is going to get you over a replacement running back, something that Mike Zimmer kind of freely admitted to in his last presser that he had, when he said there were a couple of 4 or 5 yard gains that, we could turn into 8-yard gains. During the game, I tweeted out, Matt Asiata turned a 4-yard gain into a 2-yard gain. I mean, he doesn't run well. He doesn't run with burst or acceleration, and sometimes the holes close up before he arrives, which is frustrating. And then you've got Jerick McKinnon, who I think is a big unknown. He hasn't run well, but he's only had 5 carries, so you can't just say he's not good. But I mean, he's supposed to be a complimentary back. He was drafted to be a complimentary back. But that's how they discussed him. They didn't discuss him as a replacement for Adrian Peterson, which of course at the time would have been kind of weird to talk about anyway. But that wasn't the idea for him, and for him to take on a full role, I don't know that that's something that the Vikings were planning on. And for as amazing as he looked in the preseason, whether or not he can adopt the full complement of duties, that remains to be seen, because he's only been a running back for a couple of months now. So, who knows? I think Rhett Ellison being flexed out to do some of the Kyle Rudolph things, that's going to hurt the running game even more. And this running game is the worst it's ever been in Vikings history.
There is a long article that you wrote at Vikings Journal, is that correct? That goes into great detail about how this is a historically bad season for the Vikings run offense so far. Is there anything we can do in terms of picking up free agents? Is there anyone else we can look to potentially save us from the Asiata-McKinnon connection or lack of connection for the rest of the season?
Yeah, well, the Vikings actually worked 2 of them out. So I mentioned a couple of players in that article, and 2 of them were, Ben Jarvis Green Ellis, who I think has gone from bafflingly played by the Bengals. I mean, no one wanted him to play for the last 2 years for the Bengals, to probably underrated given sort of all of the issues surrounding him. I mean, people talk about him a lot, and as a result, he's mostly been subject to criticism when he's probably fine. I mean, he's not old. In fact, if you take a look at Ben Jarvis Green Ellis's age and compare it to Matt Asiata's age, Ben Jarvis Green Ellis is only 2 years older than Matt Asiata. Matt Asiata has only been on the team. This is his 3rd year on the team. I don't think, Green Ellis is particularly old. And so they worked him out. They obviously didn't sign him. And then they also worked out Dion Lewis, who, again, they didn't sign. And Dion Lewis hasn't had time as a starter, but I think the Vikings don't necessarily need to look for a starter so much as look for a running back that will allow them to fill the role of a starter, much like I was talking about Kyle Rudolph. So Dion Lewis would be a good back to complement with Jerick McKinnon, just because he can run between the tackles and move the line of scrimmage. Those I think are probably things that you might want. Other than that, Bryce Brown is the 4th running back for the Buffalo Bills. He could take a look. He's not a free agent, but he might be available because, not a lot of teams like to carry 4 running backs anyway. So who knows? I mean, Brown and Lewis could provide short yardage runs. And if you don't want to grab a veteran, you could take a look at some of the practice squad players. When Adrian Peterson initially was out, I looked at maybe 5 players that were on practice squads. 2 of them have already been grabbed. Marion Grice has been signed by the Arizona Cardinals. Fitzgerald Toussaint is looking like he'll take over running back duties for Justin Forsett, who looks like he'll take over running back duties for Bernard Pierce, who took over running back duties for Ray Rice. Who knows? But then you've got a couple of other running backs. Not all of them are complimentary, but you've got Lake Seastrunk with the Carolina Panthers. I think he was drafted by the Washington Redskins. He played for Baylor after he played for Oregon. A lot of problems with him in terms of his attitude. But he's productive. He is a very, very good complimentary back to a power team. I don't know if he can do well for the Vikings as a feature back, but who knows? You got Henry Josie, is a great story, recovered from injury, and it's just an all around, good guy and a very impressive player. Probably had the most impressive preseason out of every running back, which is I think at least somewhat indicative. And then you've got Ryan Williams, who probably they won't choose just because of his injury problems. He played for the Cardinals. He was on injured reserve for all of 2011 with a knee injury. And then for 11 games of 2012, he was on injured reserve for a shoulder injury. And then in 2013, he missed training camp for a different knee injury that did not show up on an MRI. He was technically healthy for all of 2013, but never played a game because he missed training camp. So I don't think the Vikings will look at him. And so in terms of people who can be power backs, Jerome Smith and George Wynn were also on practice squads. Both of them are sort of just one speed runners who work on the inside, but get successes on 3rd and 2 and 3rd and 1 and stuff like that. So those are the people I would take a look at. If not, you could take a look at Capri Bibbs, who got a little bit of a tiny bit of draft hype, and then the Denver Broncos drafted him, and then they cut him, and then they put him on his practice squad. So those are the people you could take a look at.
Speaking of things we could take a look at, it's also worth noting that, as reported by everyone and their mother this week, Matt Khalil is having a terrible season and is having the worst season at his position in the entire league.
Oh, he's having a great season. If you just ignore the 4 or 5 just absolutely bafflingly hideous plays that, did significant damage to his team's chances, he's having a great year.
Yeah, so I've talked about this on various forums and what have you, but the language that they're using for Matt Khalil is mind-boggling to me. Like, I don't understand it, because this is not a standard you hold anyone else to. So if you take a look at, so he's had 106 pass blocking snaps, right? And if you assume that the only mistakes he made are the ones that led to hurries, hits, or sacks, then he has given up 14 pressures on 106 pass blocking snaps. That doesn't sound like very much. In fact, over the course of a 60 snap series, it's actually 8 mistakes, not 4. And those are just the pass blocking mistakes, right? So in terms of a game, maybe 35 of them. That's about 4 pass blocking mistakes per game. That's true. It's also the worst in the NFL. Out of 63 offensive tackles, right or left, the amount of pressures per pass blocking snap is the absolute most in the NFL. So you can't just be like, yeah, he's only made 4 or 5 mistakes a game. Well, if we exclude run blocking, which we can but shouldn't, no. Are you kidding me? No. You can't hold offensive tackles to that standard where, 4 out of every 35 mistakes or whatever, or 4 out of every 35 plays, you make a mistake. Because that's their job. Their job is to be consistent. If you look for good plays for every offensive tackle, you will find good plays. The hope is that you find good plays when you're looking for bad ones, and you don't do that with Matt Khalil.
It was fun listening to people talk about him this week too, because if you've read Grantland before, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have what's called the Bad Quarterback League.
Yeah.
Which was a great read every Tuesday, where they would go over all of the terrible quarterback play for the week, and you could get X number of points for certain things, like pick sixes. You'd get them for but my favorite one was it was like 25 points if the coach and GM hold a press conference in order to say that they're sticking by you. and that they believe in you. Like if you get the coaches if you get the coach to actually say the phrase, we trust in them, we believe in X player. Delhomme had it twice in 2 locations.
Wow.
I think they might have actually called it the Delhomme move, but when the team actually holds the press conference to say that they believe in you, they're behind you, then you got X number of points. I feel like that's what's happening right now with Khalil.
Absolutely. So this is interesting. So I just looked up the point values for the Bad Quarterback League. And so if you give up a pick six, it's 25 points. For every non-touchdown interception, it's 5 points. And if you're benched during the game, non-injury, it's 35 points. So that gives you a good idea of how many points they give. So an official vote of confidence from the coach, that's 10 points. an apology press conference is 75 points.
Wow. Yeah. That's the brass ring right there.
Yeah. It's kind of nuts. Vikings spokes media, and those are Paul Allen and Mike Wobschall. One officially employed by the Vikings, one unofficially employed by the Vikings, basically. Both took it upon themselves to talk extensively about Matt Kalil, extensively as they do, right? And both of them were like, I don't think he had a bad game. And then Mike Zimmer's presser starts with, this time it doesn't start with it. I think, someone asked him a question about Matt Kalil, or worried about Matt Kalil or something like that. Either way, he definitely was like, man, I don't know why everyone's talking about Matt Kalil. I don't know why you're on this Matt Kalil kick, because, you look at his game and he's only had 4 or 5 mistakes, which is a phrase I've already talked about. But that's also something that Mike Wobschall said. He's only had 4 or 5 mistakes, and Paul Allen said the same thing, that I only counted 5 mistakes, and for that I give him a C. And it's definitely a focus for them that they've. I don't want to say instructed, but that there basically seems to be a team memo to pump up Matt Kalil's confidence. And I just don't know, if that's something that works, if the media talks about you positively and that helps you. If that works, it's still not going to matter here, because the media is just going to be like, why are you saying these absurd things that are clearly not true? We don't need to know the play call to know that, it was his job to assign to block Junior Gillette, and then Junior Gillette got a sack. What kind of play call allows that to happen, right?
We got a comment in from Tommy the Gun 13 that said, how can Arif and Pro Football Focus be so wrong about Matt Kalil? Should they have friends on the team to make accurate analysis?
That's true.
Wow. all you really need to do is be on the same email list when they blast you with the talking points, and you're good to go.
Yeah, it's baffling to me, because Mike Zimmer said, in the off season, sort of when you coach a team, you begin to learn about the kinds of things you need to talk about players. One example that he used was Xavier Rhodes, where, he learned that Rhodes doesn't respond necessarily all that well to yelling. And so you can make him a better player if you sort of tailor your reactions to him and your criticisms of him in a particular way, just like it is for all humans, right?
It's the compliment sandwich.
I thought it was good you were in position. One criticism I have is you didn't get your head turned around, and they made the completion. And I really appreciate that you're a very fast player. So that's our compliment sandwich.
And you smell just wonderful today. Go out there and get him, Tiger. No, but that's stupid. I get it to a point, and there's a no. Okay, the whole idea isn't stupid, but applying it to the Matt Kalil situation is. It's one thing to be, in a practice situation or a training camp or at warm-ups or whatever, and it's like, all right, it doesn't work to yell at Xavier Rhodes, so we're just gonna tune up the way that we talk to him at practice, and hopefully we'll see better results. Oh, we did, because Xavier Rhodes is a professional and a good football player and can learn and adapt and perform reasonably consistently when he's healthy. So Matt Kalil is now the reason for this bizarro press disinformation campaign, I guess, that penetrates, that starts at the highest echelons of the Vikings organization and penetrates down into its lowest. And it's all to make him feel better so that he doesn't, carry the last play with him on the next one and psych himself out. Does anyone really believe that's going to work? Does Matt Kalil does he actually believe that these people are not just puffing him up in the press when he's out there every day sucking and probably thinking about how badly he sucks?
Well, so my question is, when is it going to begin to work? Because if you recall, his preseason was also abysmal. And we talked about him in the preseason, and we basically said, the exact same things. When he got demolished by Tamba Hali and a bunch of other people that were basically nobodies. If you take a look at all 141 players that Pro Football Focus says took 25% of the snaps, 141 in the preseason, and these include names like Josh Aladinoye, and Chandler Burton and Kelvin Palmer and David Foucault, which is an actual name. And some of them are backups. Some of them are not in the league anymore, some of these names that I just mentioned. So out of all 141 of these players that took 25% of the preseason snaps, Matt Khalil in Pro Football Focus's pass blocking efficiency rating ranks 136. We were criticizing him all throughout the preseason for his terrible play, that he gave up in 50 pass blocking snaps. He gave up 2 sacks, a hit, and 4 hurries. And in all of that, in all of that time, they were saying, well, don't listen to Pro Football Focus. And, they don't know what the play call is. And I thought Matt Khalil played pretty well. And, against Tamba Ali, he was actually sort of experimenting. So it's not really, what you're going to see in the regular season anyway. And, Paul Allen did his thing again, where he was like, well, Tamba Ali is great. He's a fantastic pass rusher, which, he's true. He's very good. He's very, very good. But literally every time this has happened, Paul Allen has talked up his opponent like he's going to the Hall of Fame. And all of these guys are better than average pass rushers. I mean, the Vikings have been in a situation where the people rushing against Matt Khalil are better than average. And you've got Junior Gillette, who's slightly better than average. You got Tom Ali, who's very good. Chandler Jones, who's great. But I mean, they're not like Derek Thomas, right? They're not like 2011 Jared Allen. They're good. Matt Khalil is supposed to be good too.
Well, and that's why this is so stupid is, we're in this situation where now, coaches and, reporters that are reliant on their access to the team are out there cheerleading for this guy, and it's affecting the team. The team has to know that this is, for the most part, puffery. I mean, they've been out there this whole time. They were at training camp. They watched him suck. They were there for weeks 1 and 2, and it's not just talking to one guy at practice. It's going out and talking to the press and, talking to the whole team like Matt Khalil is not like Matt Khalil doesn't suck. And it's this whole thing where if we all just, wish real hard and clap our hands loud enough, then, maybe he'll come back to life. Maybe he'll turn into a fairy and, do fairy stuff on the line, I guess. I don't know. I didn't think about that too hard before I... At any rate, it's detrimental to the team to have
Dusty has fairies on the brain. That's okay.
This is it's taken the team down, and it's not fair to either Khalil or to the Vikings organization to have this, Frankenstein's PR monster lumbering around causing all these problems. And that's the thing is that, the coaching staff has hung their hats on, just don't listen to Pro Football Focus, give Khalil some time. We're just, small sample size. He's actually really good. He'll be just as good as his rookie season. Maybe nobody said that, but they're so committed to this narrative. Like, when can they walk away from it? When can they finally say, oh, okay, we actually knew he sucked at like week 2. We were just putting you guys on. we were just hoping he'd turn it around. And then, it's week 8 and he hasn't turned it around. And then, he gets benched in favor of, some random guy.
Maybe next year he turns in the Ponder preseason like Ponder did this year. And then everyone just feels better about it.
Well, okay, so think about it this way, though. If you take a look at his Pro Football Focus grades, and again, I'm not saying that they're gospel or anything like that, but they're a pretty quick and handy tool for what I'm about to explain, which is, if they think that this sort of treatment of Khalil is likely to improve his play, right? If they think that this is the way to do it to improve his play, and obviously that's what they're beholden to first. They're not beholden to telling us the truth 100% of the time or even 50% of the time. They're beholden to making the team better. Fine. If they think that that's, sort of what works, right? Then we should see some sort of improvement. And his Pro Football Focus grades from the preseason games all the way to the regular season are 0.4, negative 0.1, negative 2.2, negative 2.8, negative 5.0, negative 4.8. There is an argument that this is making him worse.
Well, or that he is just getting worse and this is not helping.
Right. I mean, obviously, A then B doesn't mean A leads to B. But you know what I'm saying.
The point is he's not getting better. He has shown no signs that this is working at all. In fact, he is continuing to get worse as this, ludicrous program of mental reprogramming has gone on.
Right. And I mean, you could, if we're being like rigorous to the standards of formal logic, you could say he'd be even worse if it were not for this. But then the question is just like, why is he playing?
And then if this is as good as it gets and we have to go through this just to get crappy Matt Khalil, like what are we doing this for?
Yeah, and I mean, we could talk a little bit about sort of who the Vikings have as a backup, or what to do with Khalil, and we'll talk about it a little bit. But it's obviously it's more of a talking point than something that we can say, because the solution is not apparent, because tackles are hard to find, right? I mean, let's not get into the discussion that left tackles are necessarily more hard to find than right tackles. At this point in the NFL, it's about equally important to have a good pass blocking tackle on either side of the line. And in fact, there's a lot of good research that supports that. They need to have a good right tackle and a good left tackle in order to have pressure-free situation for your quarterback, all that, right? But tackles are hard to find. There's very few organizations in the NFL that have what you'd conceivably call tackle depth, enough where you can get at least a marginal starter out of the tackles that you have, right? And so it's difficult to think of the ability to trade for tackle. I mean, conceivably they could trade for Anthony Davis, with the San Francisco 49ers. I doubt they're going to make a trade. I really doubt it. But if they did, that would be, a potential target, because Jonathan Martin is starting ahead of him, and he's not doing bad despite, everything that happened in Miami. But yeah, so I mean, that's a possibility. Or you could take a look at the roster. Unusually, there is another player who was a rookie in 2012 on the roster that is Matt Khalil's backup. That is Mike Harris. And Mike Harris is different from it. He's the polar opposite of Matt Khalil in one sense, which is that he was an undrafted free agent who was forced to start because of injury in San Diego. Matt Khalil obviously was the complete opposite of an undrafted free agent, was the most highly coveted player at his position. And Michael Harris had probably a worse year in their rookie years than Matt Khalil is having so far this year. I think, especially up to this point in after the third game, heading into the fourth, the worst of the two. So Mike Harris was worse than Matt Khalil by a significant margin, and is worse than what Matt Khalil is putting together so far. He was just disgustingly bad, but he played for North Turner, and the hope is that because he's an undrafted free agent, he's grown in his time since then, right? He did get cut by San Diego, so obviously he didn't grow to the standards that Mike McCoy wanted, right, over in San Diego. But I mean, he did okay in 2013 in his 194 snaps. His 2013 preseason was actually pretty good. His 2014 preseason was average. But I think probably what you got from him in 2012 was a better indicator of who he is. And so he's very, very likely a better player than he was in 2012, which would imply that he might be a better player than Matt Khalil is right now. But that's not really a solution so much as a change, right?
Well, yeah, and neither one of them are still any good. I mean,
so the only other option you have besides trading for a player like Anthony Davis or promoting Michael Harris, who's need to improve by an almost inconceivable margin, because the amount he has to improve is much more than the amount Phil Lodeholt improved between 2011 and 2013, and Phil Lodeholt had to improve a lot. And that was at the time, it was completely unlikely that he would do that. Imagine how unlikely it is that Michael Harris improved. So if that's not what you're gonna do, then the other solution is to kick Charlie Johnson out to left tackle. And in 2011, Charlie Johnson was a much better tackle than Matt Khalil is right now, and we all know he was a bad tackle. That is kind of a solution, except now you have to figure out what to do at guard. So from a tackle perspective, I would call that a solution, because it moves you from just god-awful liability to, you have to account for how bad he is. And I'm okay with, you have to account for how bad he is, instead of massive liability. And so in that sense, it's a solution, but then you don't have a solution at guard, because Matt Khalil isn't a guard. He can't play guard. He's not strong enough to be a guard. He's not big enough to be a guard. A guard's job is not to just get in the way. I mean, there's a reason guards are hard to find in the NFL. They're arguably harder to find than actually tackles. The guard depth in the league is abysmal. It might be the worst depth at any position in the league, even quarterback. And so it's very, very difficult to find a good guard. And Matt Kalil does not display those quantities because he's supposed to be a pass blocking tackle that was able to take care from a technique perspective of edge rushers with the footwork to deal with the guys, who won on speed, and the handwork and instincts to deal with the guys who countered inside, and the leverage to deal with guys who attack with power. And he was supposed to be sort of weak at run blocking. Those are not the qualities that would make him a particularly good guard, especially because he's like at least 15 pounds too light to be a guard. And I don't know if a player who's being criticized for A, not adapting to his new body well enough, or B, not being fast enough, or C, being passive. I mean, that's a pretty good criticism of him. As much as you don't want to talk about, player psychology or whatever, he looks passive out there. If you want to turn him into a guard. So you don't have a solution there at guard, and your primary backup at guard is already playing, right? I mean, I guess it's Vlad Dukas. And he's bad, which would imply, he's terrible, which would imply that the next man up you have at guard is worse. So that's Charlie Johnson. And do you really want, or not Charlie Johnson, that might be David Yankee or Joe Berger. And do you really want your reliability to be bigger at guard than you do at tackle? I think most NFL people might say yes, but I think there's a possibility that whoever was behind Vlad Dukas on the roster is not only worse at his position than Matt Kalil is at tackle, but also a bigger liability because interior pressure tends to hurt quarterbacks more than edge pressure as much, as we place the importance on the left tackle. The reason left tackle is important is because the best speed rusher, the best pass rusher is on the outside. But that doesn't matter if you're going to give him a free release as a guard on the inside when that guard is not particularly good. So there's no solution. It's just a talking point.
If only we had some big brand name quarterback like a Breeze or a Brady or a Manning where if you touched them, that immediately the defense got a penalty. Like if only we had that, Matt Kalil, we wouldn't even be talking about Matt Kalil. You're like, oh, well, yeah, somebody gets past him and everything, but there's a penalty on every play, so it's okay.
That would be nice. I think we're closer to that.
We are getting closer to that because there's a game next week. Not next week. There's a game this Sunday.
That's technically next week if you, like most of America, believe that the week starts on Sunday.
Also, there is a game next week.
There is, in fact. There is also a game next week, too.
All right, so one thing that we forgot to mention in that recap is actually talking a little bit more about Teddy Bridgewater, which is surprising because this podcast loves Teddy Bridgewater, and so we should have talked about him more. So why don't we quickly talk about him, and then move to the rest of the podcast. So first, I mean, didn't he look good?
Well, it was hard to tell because he was under pressure so much, but he showed good vision, and he made one incredible throw as he was in process of having his head taken off. I mean, the guy...
it was the 30-yarder Greg Jennings?
Yes. And, of course, Greg Jennings can find his way to the ball, but Bridgewater clearly has poise and a good head on his shoulders. He seems like the kind of guy who doesn't get rattled by pressure. And he seems to move well in the pocket. He looks like an NFL quarterback.
Yeah. So the one thing that the constant pressure did tell us is sort of the differences between Teddy Bridgewater as a quarterback under pressure and the differences between specifically Matt Castle, but also, that other quarterback that we have on the roster. And
he who shall not be named.
Right. And
McLeod, John Balthazar, Bethel Thompson. McLeod, John Balthazar, Bethel Thompson.
Yeah. Well, so it's not Balthazar, it's Baltazar. There's no H.
Balthazar. Aren't they pronounced the same way, though? I don't know.
Oh.
Not him, though.
Right. So the difference between the two of them is that, so the first quarterback that the Vikings had in this era was really bad under pressure, particularly poor under pressure. And then it translated into his play where he would bail out of clean pockets. Matt Castle next, was worse under pressure, but he wasn't worse than, he who shall not be named. And he didn't thrive under pressure, but he didn't wilt under it either. He did a better job under pressure. This one seems to thrive under pressure, does a very good job under pressure. I wouldn't say he's better under pressure than when he's not, but I'm not worried about him being under pressure as often as I am worried about the other two. And he's fantastic. He senses pressure extremely well, which is not a quality I think the other two had. He steps up in the pocket, which is something Matt Castle showed at times, but not necessarily do on a consistent basis. And, he did it enough times that we were like, so that's what that looks like. So, I mean, it's not like he doesn't do that, but Teddy does it really well and intuitively and often. And he very rarely leaves clean pockets. I think he did it once, in this game, but for the most part, I mean, if that, for the most part, he knows when the pocket is clean and he knows when it's not, and he distinguishes between the two extremely well. And reacts, appropriately to them. If the pocket is clean, he might be able to get to the next area of his progression. If it's not, he might have to roll out or scramble. And he has an intuitive understanding of the way that the scramble drill works. And so he knows who he needs to target and, if they're open. And then, I mean, he's also got a little bit of speed. He's got more speed than Castle, probably less than he who must not be named, but he uses it better. And so, he has the ability to sort of punish a defense for opening up rush lanes when they scramble. And I mean, he was accurate. I mean, I know his completion percentage was only 60%, but given the difficulty of his throws, the rollout that he had, to Greg Jennings that was incomplete, the deep shots that he had, and also, occasionally there'd be a drop or whatever. I thought he was very, very accurate given the circumstances and the fact that he didn't practice, with the first team for the entire season or much of the preseason. So I'm excited about him.
There were a couple of ugly little drop-offs to that you had talked about on Twitter to, I believe it was McKinnon, either McKinnon or Asiata. That looked a little ugly, but otherwise he was really moving out there and getting things to go. It was different. It was refreshing, I would almost say, to see him running around. And how about that play where he broke 2 or 3 tackles before he tossed the ball?
Oh God, it was 3, and it was gorgeous. I was actually in a discussion with somebody who's a very big Jaguars fan and was like, look at this amazing play by Blake Bortles. And Blake Bortles did the exact same thing. He broke 2 or 3 tackles, kind of in the same manner as Teddy Bridgewater, and then he slung it. And Bortles was the completion and Teddy's wasn't. But Teddy's did hit McKinnon's hands, even if it was a bit high. And just to have, to have someone who can do that, it's refreshing because it's an instinct to use quickness. It's not just having quickness or having speed, but it's an instinct to use it well. And I mean, I don't want to call it a resume play because it was relatively mundane in its outcome, but man, was it pretty.
It was about time for something like that to happen. Well, as we mentioned at the top of the show, we will be having a special guest on, and I think it's time to bring us out. So if everyone can please welcome Jeanna, who writes for the Falcoholic, who's coming on to talk about the impending game between the Vikings and the Falcons. Jeanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So we have the big game coming up on Sunday. We got flexed, we got moved, so it's the 3 p.m. game this week.
Very exciting.
Yes, we have the 3 p.m. game. We'll be outside in the fall, and it'll be the defense of the Vikings, which is starting to show some real signs of improvement against Matt Ryan and the offense. What can you tell us about the offense that we'll be seeing coming out on Sunday?
Well, In two of the games this season, they have really been firing on all cylinders. They've been able to get some things going on the ground, which has been an element of the offense that has been lacking over the past couple of seasons. So that really adds an important dimension to the offensive attack. And then Matt Ryan is a very good quarterback. Roddy White practiced today. He was limited, but he did practice. So I do think that he will be active for Sunday. And Julio Jones is one of the best in the league. And so their passing attack is really, really dangerous. So, they're a pretty high powered offense if they're clicking. If you saw any of the week 2 game in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati's a very good team, and they have, I think, one of the best defenses in the league. But they never really did get things going against Cincinnati, and the Falcons are a team that tends to not play as well on the road. So it is still kind of up in the air as far as what to expect. But if they are firing on all cylinders like they did in week 1 and week 3, they are really dangerous.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit about that. Do you think there's something besides just the quality of the Cincinnati defense that was different about the Falcons game against, Tampa Bay than it was against Cincinnati? Do you think it was a fluke, or what was different about that Cincinnati game aside from maybe the quality of the Cincinnati players than from the other 2 games that you had?
The one key thing that I think was different was that Jake Matthews, who was the 6th overall pick for the Falcons this past draft, the left tackle, it's hard to lose your starting left tackle. And he was out of that game because he had sprained his ankle in week 1. And so they had, guys filling in, guys playing different positions. And so chemistry is really important along the offensive line. And Jake Matthews is a better player than any of the guys that can back him up. So I think that really when you have the combination of going up against one of the better pass rushing teams in the league and missing your starting left tackle, I think that that's something that people maybe underestimated in terms of what kind of impact that would have.
And the backup there was Gabe Karimi, right?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I have as a fan of the NFC North, I have seen Karimi play enough games, so I apologize. That is so sad.
Yeah, and he's a guy. I mean, he was a first-round pick. Mike Tice wanted him, and obviously he had worked with him previously. Right. And so, I think that Karimi has the potential, but I don't. He missed a lot of the preseason because he also had an ankle injury. So I think that he's not fully up to speed. He did fill in week 1 when Matthews had to exit the game after suffering that injury, and he did okay.
Okay.
And he did have then, he hadn't had any reps at left tackle at all at that point. And so obviously he practiced at left tackle during the week leading up to the game in Cincinnati. But I think that, he still just wasn't fully prepared. So Jake Matthews is fully healthy. He was totally fine last week. And I do think that he is a difference maker.
Well, speaking of Chicago imports, there's also a pretty prominent one that featured pretty heavily in the Tampa Bay game, did pretty well in the New Orleans game too, if I remember correctly. Devin Hester.
Yes.
Why is he? Not just obviously he's important to the special teams for a couple of reasons, but we saw the New Orleans game, and of course a couple of injuries led to him being on the field. But I've seen him play a lot in Chicago. As a Vikings fan, it hurts me how good he was special teams, but he was never really an impact offensive player. He had a big play here or there. Yeah. But what's the difference between how he's being used here and how he was used in Chicago?
Well, when they initially wanted to use him in Chicago as a receiving threat, I think that they were looking to him as kind of a cornerstone of their offense. And I don't think he's that guy. I think that in Atlanta, he's the 4th guy on the depth chart. So you've got Roddy White, Julio Jones, and Harry Douglas, who put up over 1,000 yards last season when Roddy and then Julio were both injured.
Saved my fantasy teams.
Yeah. I mean, Harry's a very serviceable receiver. He's probably a better 3rd receiver than a lot of teams have. And so, so Devin Hester is really looked to as just an occasional target. And because he still has that killer speed, I mean, I don't care how old he is. What you saw against Tampa Bay, he's proven that he's still got it. And so And they're using him also, I think, in creative ways. That end around that he scored on was just beautifully designed. And that's exactly the kind of play that I was hoping that they would come up with for him, because it's just such a great use of his skill set. So, and I also have heard that he and Cutler did not get along.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that the bad blood there also probably would have impacted his productivity.
Well, there's also a good question about who Cutler did get along with besides Brandon Marshall. So
anyone who brought him a carton of smokes, I'm sure was his best friend. Wanted to ask on the Devin Hester thing. First things first, as a Vikings fan, it brings so much joy to my heart to see that the record for returns was broken against a team that wasn't the Vikings.
The odds were so good that that's what was going to happen too.
Oh my God, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to watch that because it was coming.
Yeah.
It was fourth week on the season, fourth week of the schedule. Like, no, this is going to happen. So thank you, Devin Hester, for breaking it against a team that just decided to not tackle
and
you.
against Lovey.
Right?
Oh,
it's perfect.
Man.
And with Deion Sanders in the house, I mean, really, it needed to be broken week 3.
Yeah, Deion Sanders was talking about how he was going to do it that night. Which, when I was watching it, I was like, well, that just means it's not going to happen. It's going to happen the next night, which would be against us. But no, I'm glad that that's what happened. 4 of his 19 punt and kickoff returns, those touchdowns, were against the Vikings. And thankfully,
gosh.
Yeah, it's out of control. Thankfully,
it's absurd.
The 20th thing, the field goal kick return, that was against the Giants, so we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, 4 of his 19, punt or kickoff returns were against the Vikings. And also, it's
twice a year all those years. You certainly had a better percentage chance.
Oh no, that's true.
And that number seems low. Like, just looking at it, only 4 times. Like, he had at least like 50 or 60-yard kickbacks.
Well, it's also
ridiculous number of times.
It's also true that I'm going to look this up really quick, but I'm pretty confident of all the teams that he's played, I think like more than once, that he averaged a higher kick return against the Vikings than any other team. And if that's not true, maybe that's not true. I doubt it. Then it's pretty close to true. Let me take a quick look. Against the Vikings, he averaged 13.7 yards per punt return, which is the most against any team besides the Green Bay Packers that he has played more than twice.
Wow.
So that's who you have, returning punts and evidently also kickoffs.
Yes. Yep, he's doing it all now.
I did enjoy your conversation with Chris Cluey after he broke the record on Twitter. Like, waiting for a word from Chris Cluey on that. The kids are watching TV. Like, yeah, priorities.
Yeah, no, he was watching The Fairly Odd Parents, so he couldn't watch Devin Hester break a record that Cluey himself had helped set.
So your run game hasn't been wasn't as I would say it wasn't as good as it had been in previous years last year. How was Steven Jackson and Jaquez Rogers 3, 2, 1? How are Jackson and Rogers doing this year?
Much better. Run blocking was a big problem last season, and that is much improved this year. So that is a really big component of that. But also, Jackson, last season, he was injured in week 2, and he was never quite right until toward the end of the season. Rogers has always been good. He's good at everything. He's great in pass protection. He's so small. It doesn't look like he should be. I mean, he's like 5'7". He's the only guy in the locker room that I don't really have to, crane my neck to look up at. He is so good in pass protection, and he's just a really stout runner. And he has great hands. He's a good receiver too. And so, but yeah, Jackson has been really good this year. He's exactly what they've needed him to be. And I think that at Jackson's age, what he needs is to kind of be the nominal feature back in a running back by committee setup. And so that's really what they're working with right now. And it's working. They're not going to have the top rushing attack in the league. Mm-hmm. And you don't really want that when you have a quarterback like Matt Ryan and receivers like White and Jones, but they need to do enough on the ground to to keep the offense balanced. That's something they haven't been able to do for the past several seasons, and they're doing that. So I'm really pleased about that.
Yeah, so if they can reliably get like 4 yards on first down on any given play,
Yeah,
that's sort of what you need.
Just to give you an example, when they get any positive yardage on a first down, I'm like, yes. I mean, that's how bad it was last year.
Oh, you have no idea.
The Bears were like that every time Hester would catch a ball last year. Like, really?
There were actually
really?
There were actually multiple Vikings fans who were cheering every time Teddy Bridgewater threw a routine first down.
Yeah.
It's just and Vikings Twitter among themselves discussed how crazy it was that we started cheering routine pass plays. So I know exactly what you mean about getting like a rushing first down and just cheering for the mundacity of it.
Yes.
Well, okay, so let's actually talk a little bit about the offensive line. So first, there's a rumor that Jeff Davidson from the Vikings actually was going to coach the offensive line with the Falcons. That didn't pan out because the Vikings didn't let him visit the Falcons. So you got another former Viking,
Yes.
Mike Tice, who actually Vikings fans have no problem with. He got forced out because of an ownership change at head coach. So, who knows? But as an offensive line coach, I think everyone kind of agrees he's been stellar. Have you found that to be the case?
I really have. And I've spent a lot of time at camp over the past few years. And this year, I really kind of watched Tice and then Brian Cox closely. And first of all, if you saw any of Hard Knocks, you know why. Because these guys, they're the most entertaining guys on the field at any given moment. And I'm saying that on a team that has Roddy White. So, that's it's high praise. But yeah, I've enjoyed watching them because I think that it's important in those positions to have a former player. There are nuances to the game and there are specific things with technique and adapting your technique for different opponents, and especially with the offensive line, that I'm not sure was really happening before. And so that's where I think Tice has really had an impact, a really positive impact. So I've been thrilled with him. I just think he's great. He's a great hire.
And there's also pretty significant offensive line rotation. It's not just that you brought, Jake Matthews in, but you've replaced, Peter Collins at center. That's Joe Hawley now, who was also a bit entertaining on Hard Knocks. Yes. I think you brought in John Asamoah on free agency, and he's starting. Mm-hmm. And the only person that I think that I can recognize from the previous line, not that I paid an enormous amount of attention to the Falcons last year, is Lamar Holmes, who was a liability last year. This year, I don't know. He seems to be not the best performer on that offensive line, but there's been a significant change in that offensive line. Has that been a big part of why the Falcons offense has been, running on all cylinders?
It has. For one thing, Hawley did come in and take over the starting position at center, maybe midway through the season. I can't remember which week, but and the line last season did get slightly better when he took over there. Cons, I actually really like Peter Cons, and I think he has the talent to play center in the NFL, but he just isn't getting it at this point. So I'm hoping that Tice can work with him and get him to that point. But right now, Hawley is a very serviceable starting center. And then Asamoah was a huge upgrade. Right guard was a real positional weakness for the Falcons last season. And you know how it works on the offensive line. If you have one weak spot, the guys on either side have to compensate for him, and they can't. I mean, it doesn't work well. And so right guard was a real weakness. And so Asamoah is fantastic. He's a great run blocker. He's great in pass protection. So he's a real upgrade and just adds a lot of stability there. At left guard, we have Justin Blaylock, who's been with the team forever. And he's really, steady, reliable, nothing flashy, but he's a really reliable guy. So that's good. And then, Jake Matthews. Lamar Holmes is the weak link at this point. However, he is a guy that I have seen. He has worked really, really hard to improve. And he also, it's been really interesting to kind of talk to him about his development and just see the way that Mike Tice has influenced him, because he said that, when he's asked about how he didn't perform well last season, he'll be able to tell you, my footwork was bad. I didn't understand things about hand placement, and these are things that Mike Tice has taught me. And so he had a bad game against Cincinnati, and after that game, he told the media, I fell back into old habits. I got kind of overwhelmed and I fell back into old habits with, my footwork was bad, my hand placement was bad. So he seems to have a better mental handle on the position. I think that was a really important step in his development. And he's still not the strongest guy on the line. He's definitely the weak link on that line. However, he is better than last season. I think he will continue to improve.
All right, so the matchup there is particularly interesting to me. So the Vikings have Brian Robinson there, who, every fan talks about sort of the players that don't get a lot of press this way, but I think it's true. He's one of the most underrated, in my opinions, defensive end in the NFL. And part of that's just because there's so much defensive end depth in the NFL right now that guys that aren't immediately at the top tier are probably just not going to get talked about. So I don't really have a chip on my shoulder about that, but I am, pretty interested in how this matchup is going to go. Last year, he led the NFL in total pressures, and particularly led the NFL in quarterback hurries. He didn't get that many sacks, and that tends to be his career over the past 3 years. Mm-hmm. He's always had a lot of hurries. He hasn't had a lot of sacks. When Vikings fans, we used to say something like, "Oh, well, he's attacking from the left or from the offense's right, and mm-hmm. And therefore the quarterback could see him and get rid of the ball quicker." That's probably not true, but it's definitely going to be probably the most anticipated matchup in terms of one-on-one matchups. What's your take on whether or not Lamar Holmes can hold up against him?
Well, it's just going to depend on if Holmes can mentally stay in the game. I think that it will be a real test for him. It's hard to say, mm-hmm. It really is hard to say. You hope that Holmes has learned from his mistakes and that he will, be well prepared. I know he's doing a better job of understanding what he's seeing on film and that sort of thing. So I would hope that he would go out there and be well prepared, but it sounds like it might be a dream matchup for your guy. So.
Yeah, no, that might be sort of the best way for the Vikings to start beginning to win.
Yeah, and I don't think that you can discount. Just because a guy's not putting up sacks, if he is consistently disrupting the quarterback, that is a valuable player.
So that's a lot of what he does.
Yeah, and that's something that if you can disrupt Matt Ryan, if you can get him off rhythm, if you can get him off balance, that's the best way that you can succeed against the Falcons.
Yeah, and so, right, so I wanted to talk about the next. I think sort of a natural transition from talking about the offensive line is to talk about, quarterbacks under pressure. Mm-hmm. And the last 2 weeks, the Vikings have gone against quarterbacks that tend to be pretty decent against pressure, a little bit weaker than a quarterback of their skill should be against, maybe interior pressure, whateber. Mm-hmm. But just in general, a quarterback who's very good under pressure, but better than, I think, Drew Brees and Tom Brady, at least relative to their natural skill level. I think Matt Ryan regresses less than the two of them under pressure. Yeah, okay.
I think that it's because Matt Ryan has been under more pressure, and so he has had to learn to work through that. And I think that it's actually a really underrated quality of his, because he took so many hits last year and would just bounce up and throw the next pass. It does not seem to faze him. He has a short memory, and you've got to have a short memory as a quarterback. So, yeah, I do think that that's an underrated quality of Matt Ryan's.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the few quarterbacks. I think Pro Football Focus gives him a positive grade under pressure. Very few quarterbacks do that. He's also mm-hmm. the fourth most accurate quarterback under pressure, according to them, although obviously that doesn't adjust for things like the distance of pass and things like that. But what is sort of the, knowing that Matt Ryan regresses less than a lot of other high-level quarterbacks under pressure, what is sort of the best way to disrupt him? Is it interior pressure? Is it pressure, maybe coming from, say, Lamar Holmes' side, or, maybe are particularly complex blitzes, a good way to get at him? What's the sort of the best way to do that?
I think, where I see him, where he seems to be the most susceptible, and this is not very surprising, but it's, blindside blitzes. Mm-hmm. And that's just off the top of my head. I haven't watched a ton of the all 22 from this season, right. Or anything like that. So, but just off the top of my head, just thinking back to last season in particular, it seems like he was, and just thinking back through his career, it seems like when he's caught off guard with a blindside blitz, that's when, because you've really got to catch him off guard. So, I mean, that's not that surprising. I think that most quarterbacks would be susceptible to that. But yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, that's what I would think.
Okay, and if Roddy White, for whatever reason, it sounds like he's going to play, like he said, but if for whatever reason Roddy White, can't play, what is the offense going to look like? Is it just going to run through Julio Jones and the running backs, or what do you think the plan is there?
Nope, they're going to spread the ball out. You'll see some targets to the very tall tight end, Levine Toilolo. He's 6'8", which, so he's automatically a mismatch for most players.
Right.
The issue with him is he doesn't have the greatest hands, but he's coming along as a receiver, so that's good. You'll see a lot of Harry Douglas targets. Now, that's an opportunity for Minnesota's defensive backfield because I think that, I can't remember the percentage, but out of all the interceptions Matt Ryan threw last season, the vast majority of them were targets to Harry Douglas. And so for whatever reason, I don't know if it's, miscommunication between Ryan and Douglas, or if Harry doesn't, I think that it's because Douglas doesn't run routes that are as clean as the routes run by Jones and White.
A little bit off target probably gives things away.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's probably what it is. But so I mean, that's an opportunity for Minnesota right there because, and one of Ryan's worst interceptions this year was a target to Harry Douglas in the Cincinnati game. So it's already, kind of starting up again. So that's an opportunity. Eric Weems, he was with Chicago for the past couple of seasons, and the Falcons just brought him back, and so he's the he and then Courtney Roby, they're the guys on down the depth chart, but they may even get some targets. Dirk Cutter likes to throw a lot of receivers out there and send them all downfield, so you could see any kind of combination. Even if one of the guys is out, you'll still see a lot of targets to a lot of different players, and the running backs will get involved in the passing game too. So.
Okay. All right, so then actually I wanted to talk about tight ends a little bit because, the Falcons have gone through a pretty significant transition when it comes to tight ends. Bear Pasco, Levine Toilolo, who I think a couple of Falcons fans have referred to as having skillet hands. They're not quite the same. Yeah. I think understating it a little bit as a Hall of Fame tight end like Gonzalez. So, first, I remember I was talking to Scott Karasik about this, over at Draft Falcons, and he was telling me this might actually be a good thing because Gonzalez would demand the ball. I don't know if that's true or not, but
I don't know about demanding the ball, but I do feel like he was a safety valve for Ryan, and I feel like Ryan was very dependent upon that, and I think it may have hindered his development somewhat.
Okay, so. Obviously, it's not, a good thing to have maybe a less skilled player out there, but you think that this is like an opportunity for Matt Ryan to become a better quarterback then?
I do, and I mean, you cannot replace that productivity, and you just have to be realistic about that. There are very few tight ends who will ever be as good as Tony Gonzalez, and so you do have to have realistic expectations. I think that Toilolo will develop into a very serviceable receiving tight end. He is not ever going to have 900 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns in a season. I mean, that's just not a realistic expectation. But the nice thing is that the Falcons' receiving core is so deep, and their running backs, all of them catch the ball pretty well. And so they have a lot of receiving targets. And so you can make up that productivity, not with one player, but you can spread out the ball a lot because you have so many targets.
Okay. So the next thing to talk about, I think, is probably just, the matchup in general. So, Matt Ryan's going to be playing outside. He's going to be playing away from home. Do you anticipate that to be a significant problem for him, or what do you think?
I have to be honest. I am so happy that we're playing you guys now.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah, not in December, especially since it's going to be outside this season.
It'd be nice, warm fall, and half our guys are injured. It'll be great.
Yeah. And so, he does not play as well on the road, but I think he'll be okay. I do think that week 2, I think that another factor was that they were coming off a really, really exciting win over a division rival that we all despise. The players despise them. And so that was a really satisfying win. And I think that, I don't want to say they were complacent, but I think that they probably thought pretty highly of themselves going into the Cincinnati game, and they maybe weren't entirely mentally prepared for what they were going up against. I think that was an important reality check, and I think that they will be prepared going into.
You don't think so? We put this in the show notes really quickly. You don't think there's the possibility this time of a hangover game?
When you beat a team like they beat Tampa Bay, I think that's always a possibility. And so I think that it is something that I'm mildly concerned about, especially after seeing the way that they played in Cincinnati. So I do think that the coaching staff is saying all the right things about how they're preparing the players and how they're focusing the players. And I think the players are saying all the right things too. So we're just going to have to wait and see, where the rubber meets the road on Sunday.
So when you take a survey of the Minnesota defense, just taking a quick look based on what however casually or seriously you follow, the NFC North or whatever, what do you think is the best opportunity for the Falcons offense to attack?
I honestly don't know. I saw a few minutes of the Vikings against the Saints, just enough to see Drew Brees get in a slap fight, which was really entertaining to me. I was rooting for you guys, by the way.
Well, of course, from a divisional level, and because it's just nice to see Drew Brees dropped on his neck and shoulders.
Always. Captain Munnerlyn is my hero for that one. That was just delightful. So, I would love for you to tell me, because I really am not that familiar with your defense.
Okay, well, I guess just a general survey. So going into the season, we expected the defensive line to sort of carry the rest of the team. That hasn't quite developed, although, I wouldn't argue that either of the defensive ends are bad. They are probably disappointments given sort of the contract value that they've put together. Linval Joseph, big free agent signing, in my opinion, at the time of the signing, was probably the best 4-3 nose tackle in the league. Mm-hmm. Flashed a lot of that in the Rams game, didn't show a lot of it in the next 2 games. And then you've got a disappointment, functionally, maybe an average player at best, right now anyway, in Sharif Floyd. But then if you move back, you've got the linebacker core, a problem that hasn't been solved for Minnesota, has been a problem for the past 2, maybe even 3 years. Chad Greenway, in my opinion, has been past his prime, but he's been playing a little bit better this season than he has in the past 3 seasons. Anthony Barr, rookie project. I don't know if you were following him out of the draft, but he's an athletic one. Yeah, I thought he
loved the pick for Minnesota, just because I feel like his ceiling is so high. But yeah, he was always going to be a project.
Yeah, and I had anticipated him being a target, for the Falcons if they weren't going to, trade up to get a pass rusher like Flo Mack or even Clowney. So Anthony Barr you're at least familiar with, and then we're probably not going to have the third linebacker on the field out too much. It's Jasper Brinkley. He's a run first defensive linebacker who doesn't fare particularly well in coverage. He's the middle linebacker when he's on the field. If Chad Greenway's not in, it sounds like it might not be. It'll be Gerald Hodges, Penn State linebacker who is a converted safety, and so he is kind of what you'd expect a converted safety to be. He's much more of a coverage defender. And then you've got safeties Harrison Smith, Robert Blanton. Robert Blanton has been somewhat of a disappointment in my eyes, sort of a starting safety. I think he's probably a very good backup, but who knows? He doesn't tackle very well, even though he's, I think, maybe leading the team in tackles. I don't think he's doing a very good job of it. But then you've got Harrison Smith, who is playing at a near Pro Bowl level right now. He's fantastic, and he's doing everything. He's rushing the passer. He's stopping the run. He's playing in the box. He's playing outside the box. He's playing man-on-man in slot situations. He's taking on tight ends. He did a very good job against Jimmy Graham. Part of the reason Minnesota held Jimmy Graham to 54 yards. And then you've got the cornerback, Xavier Rhodes, young guy, very, very physical. Sometimes lets that get in the way of his play, but he's very young, very good. Josh Robinson, very young, probably the most athletic player on the team besides, running back Jerick McKinnon, who I think I've talked about a lot, but he's from Georgia, so maybe you're a little bit familiar with him. Yeah. But he was abysmal for the past 2 years for the Vikings, and now he's probably the best cover corner. Who knows? But he's playing pretty well. And then Captain Munnerlyn, who you're a little bit familiar with, who's not playing as well as he did when he played for Carolina, but still playing pretty decently well, especially against the run. So knowing that really quickly, what are the ways that the Falcons would attack, especially knowing that they're a team that likes to put out a lot of receivers out there?
Yeah, well, I think what they're probably going to do is, probably put 4 receivers out there and send everybody downfield and just kind of get a feel for the coverage. They'll probably try to double Julio, which means that, Harry Douglas or Roddy White or Devin Hester or, whoever they send out there is going to have single coverage. And so that's what they're going to try to exploit. Julio Jones is the kind of player that can make plays in double coverage too. So it's just, I think that they'll just look toward that, try to exploit matchups that way.
And your running game has progressed. Do you think it'll continue to be sort of solid? Obviously it's not going to lead the team like it did, for the Falcons a couple of years ago, but do you think it'll be, solid again?
Yeah, I do. I think that right now they're right around the middle of the league in terms of rushing yards per game, and I expect and hope that they'll stay there for the rest of the season. They've got Steven Jackson, who's doing well, and Jaquez Rogers. We already talked about him as well. And then they have Anton Smith. Now, this guy it's ridiculous. This guy gets like 8 touches a season, and it feels like every one of them goes for a touchdown, like 50 yards in a touchdown. Last season, I think he had 5 carries. He averaged 39 yards a carry. I mean, he has a gear that nobody else has. And so if he gets into space, he is gone and you are not going to catch him. So he is a really exciting player. He has some, ball control issues. So he's fumbled some. He fumbled against the Bucks. And so I think that's probably why they don't give him more touches. But he is a guy to watch out for because it doesn't matter what they're doing. If he can get into space, he is gone and nobody is catching up to him. And then we have Devontae Freeman, a kid that we drafted out of FSU. And he is a really talented young back. I think they're grooming him to be the feature back eventually. He's not very good in pass protection, so you won't see him on the field as much. But he's a great receiver, and this kid has vision. I mean, that's something that you cannot teach to a running back. He has incredible vision and incredible instincts, and so he's a kid that I'm really excited about. And he's been getting a few touches every game, so he's another guy to keep an eye on.
Okay. Cool. James, do you think we should start talking about the other side of the ball?
I think we should start talking about the fact that we get to break out Teddy Bridgewater for his first official start against a Falcons defense, which was frankly terrifying on last Thursday night. I feel like Bridgewater went into one of the most difficult places to play, the Superdome, and played against a pretty violent defense in the Saints, and is now being tossed into the other frying pan against a Falcons defense which ate alive Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Well, I want to start by saying I love Teddy Bridgewater. I just think he is fantastic. My husband's a Louisville fan, so I watched him all through college. He's a great kid. I was thrilled that Minnesota picked him because I think that Zimmer's a great coach. I think it's a great place for him to develop, and it was certainly a need for you guys. So I'm really happy that he ended up there, and I really wish him all the success in the world except for this Sunday.
Scott was saying the exact same thing.
I also just want to, I don't know, maybe temper expectations of the Falcons defense because, yes, they looked really good against Tampa Bay, but they looked below average in week 1 and week 2. And the reality is, and I mean, this is just the honest truth, they have no pass rush. I know they finally got sacks against the Buccaneers, and I'm really excited because
I got a sack. Yeah.
I mean, I've been waiting forever. But they have no adequate pass rushers. They are never going to have an adequate pass rush with the personnel that they have. It doesn't matter what they do. And so, I think Teddy's actually probably going to have a pretty pressure-free day, just realistically.
Yeah, so I think, why don't we start with the defensive line then? So One of the things that's curious to me is that Stanley Mapanga has looked really, really good in his limited snaps. Why is it that he's not taking more snaps as a pass rusher?
That's a great question. I would love to know the answer. It's one of those things that that Mike Nolan won't really, say, because I think that they don't want to give teams a competitive advantage in terms of preparation. But yeah, I mean, Stanley Mapanga has looked good rushing the passer. Jonathan Masquaz, another guy that, he had a really good end to the season last year. And then this season, we kind of expected him to be, really featured as a pass rusher, and he has gotten fewer snaps than I really expected. And so I don't know. I don't know what they're trying to do. I mean, honestly, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea why they're not using those guys more, because those are the closest things to pass rushers they have. They have OCU Minora, and I love OC, and he's had a great career, but he is, I think, past the point of really being able to consistently and effectively rush the passer. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're trying to do. They don't have great personnel to work with, and they're not even fielding the guys that seem to be their better pass rushers.
Well, then, so that brings up, I think, Croy Bierman, who his career has been pretty good. But right now, he seems kind of like OC, but actually maybe even to a larger degree, done. He just seems done. Is that harsh? Or, I mean, he doesn't look very good, if I'm being honest.
He looks really bad. Bierman is a guy who, he's a really athletic guy. He was always kind of small for a 4-3 defensive end, and they've, converted him to, they're doing, more odd fronts, and he's more of an outside linebacker now, and I think that his body type and all is better suited for that. But he, first of all, he's a nightmare in coverage. He is not good in coverage. When he drops into coverage, I cringe every time. And yeah, I think, and this is just my opinion, I know he mentioned this in passing on Hard Knocks, and maybe that's why it's kind of stuck with me, but week 2 of last season, he suffered a season-ending Achilles tear. And he said in the preseason that he still felt tentative on his foot, where he had the injury. And I don't know if that's still the problem. I don't know if it's slowed him down. I don't know if it's really related to that, but he does seem like a different player this year. And so I think that that's too strong of a connection to be a coincidence. So I think that it may be related to that, but he's not really doing much to help the team. So yeah, he's not very good.
Right. And then on the inside, though, I think it's probably a different story. I mean, I think it looks like, Babineau is playing well. Corey Peters, I think, is playing really well.
Yes.
And then you've also got, Soliai, you've got Malachi Goodman.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the only person that I wouldn't be scared of that regularly plays on the inside is probably Tyson Jackson. So why don't you just talk about those guys for a second?
Okay. Yeah, I was really excited about the signings of Soliai and Tyson Jackson. Soliai is just a massive person. Like I can't even believe how large he is. And so he just eats up so much space in the middle, and he's actually really athletic and quick for a guy that size. So I think that he was a great addition. Tyson Jackson is, kind of the same way. He's a huge guy, but he's really athletic. He never got a lot of sacks in his career, but he was often taking up double teams. And so that was kind of his function. And so I thought, maybe this would be his chance to break out. But no, he has not lived up to my expectations. So yeah, he's not great. Corey Peters has been a really solid contributor to this defense. And so I'm really excited that he is healthy and back. He played really, really well against Tampa Bay, and he's a difference maker. He gets really good penetration. He does bring a lot of pressure on the quarterback. So he is a really important part of that defense. And then Babineau is just really reliable. He's an older guy, but he's still playing at a high level. So I'm really happy that they retained him. I think he will retire in Atlanta, and he's playing well this season. So you don't have any real standout guys there, but you have a lot of really solid guys.
Well, so in general, how do you feel about your run defense? Accepting the fact that, the Vikings are probably not going to be fielding very good running backs the first time in a long time. In general, how do you feel about the run defense?
In general, I feel like it has improved. They have in week 1 and week 2, they did struggle. But they did do really well against Bobby Rainey last week, and he's a very good running back. And so I was encouraged by that. So I do feel like they have made some improvements. Having Peters back on the field really does help with that.
And then you have Paul Warlow, who he just eats tackles. He just gets so many of them.
Yeah, he does. He really does. He's just a great story. What a great kid, undrafted free agent, gets a starting role, and now he's, leading that defense. I mean, he really is such a leader. And it was fun to watch him in camp this year, how much he had developed, kind of coaching up the younger guys. And he's a second-year guy. It's not like he's this, grizzled veteran, but he really has taken to that leadership role. It's been fun to watch him develop.
And then, next to Warlow, it looks like there hasn't been a consistent player, but is it Bartu that's going to start there, or?
Yeah, I think that Joplo Bartu is still going to be starting there. Bartu is a guy that I feel is better suited to the outside. And so I don't think it's his natural position, and I don't think he has adapted to it as well. And that's unfortunate because he's a really good young player. He's a very talented athlete. So I'm hoping that he continues to settle into that position. The other guy that you'll see there is Prince Shembo, a rookie out of Notre Dame. And he also is a guy who he played outside linebacker at Notre Dame, and they shifted him inside. He has taken to that position. I mean, his football intelligence is off the charts. He is a really smart young man, but he is especially, his football intelligence is just something else. And he has just really, he's gotten a lot of advice from the veterans, and he's, worked with coaches to learn all he can. And he's worked really hard, but he has really adapted well to playing inside. And so, I think the starting job may be his by the end of the season next to Warlow.
Well, I see that he's on the injury report. He has a calf injury. He was limited in practice, but you expect him to play?
Who was that?
Prince Shembo.
Oh, yes, I do. If he was limited today, I do. I didn't have any time to even look at the injury report today.
Sure.
Can you tell? I had like a 12-hour workday.
No, I understand.
So I guess that I did know that. Yes, I do expect him to play, and because he's just going to be rotating in. He won't see a ton of snaps, but you will see him on the field.
Okay, and then we can talk about sort of the secondary, the defensive back. So you've got William Moore, who for a while he looked like he'd be very good, but for right now he seems to strike me as a bit of an average player. Is that unfair, or?
No, I think that for this season so far, I think that is fair.
Okay, but you've got corners that I think you could probably be pretty excited about. I mean, Alford and Trufant, and
yes.
I mean even Kamal Ishmael, who I think grabbed an interception, didn't he?
He did, a pick six. It was beautiful. Ishmael was a 7th round pick in 2013, and he has really developed nicely. He is a really sure tackler. He has really good instincts and coverage, and he has really progressed. He kind of looked lost last preseason, and he still kind of struggled with that early in this preseason, but he has really improved his game. And he had a great game against Tampa Bay, so that was fun to see. And then the corners, I'm thrilled about those young corners.
You also got them in the 2013 draft, right?
Yes, first and second rounds respectively. Desmond Trufant is he's exceptional. He is exceptionally talented, and he's really fun to watch because he will have like a near miss on a pick, and nobody is angrier than Desmond Trufant that he didn't get that interception. He's a really competitive guy, and when he was a rookie, he would cut in line in drills so that he could go up against Roddy and Julio because he knew that going up against those guys was going to get him up to speed more quickly. And so I love that about him. He's just a really competitive guy. He's really, and he's very talented. And then Alfred is a joy to watch. He's another guy he's a really physical corner, and it gets him in trouble sometimes. He'll play too physical and then he'll get burned, or he'll, draw a penalty. But he is a really talented young player. So yeah, those were two of, I think, Dimitrov's best picks.
Yeah, no, it was a pretty rich draft in terms of defensive backs for you. I think I remember, heading up to that draft, the Vikings needed a cornerback. Obviously, I ended up getting Xavier Rhodes. The person I wanted was actually Trufant, and I actually did want Alfred in the second round. They ended up having the draft for defensive backs that I wanted. Not that I'm, disappointed with Rhodes, but I mean, it's awesome to see, people that at least I liked a lot seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, those guys are panning out, absolutely.
And then aside from Alfred, Trufant, and Ishmael, there's two more defensive backs that have been getting significant snaps. I think Dwight Lowry's been the free safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's been probably about average too, or what's the?
Yeah, I'd say average. Thomas Deku was the safety over the past several seasons, and he was cut after last season. And Deku had a lot of issues with taking bad angles to the ball and not wrapping up, kind of shying away from contact. And that's something that I can say for Lowry, is that he's an improvement there. He's not like a crazy ball hawk or anything, but he is a serviceable free safety, which is, I think, an upgrade over what the Falcons had last season. So that's good.
Okay. And then Robert McLean, you've been playing in the slot.
Yeah, they play out of the nickel a lot, so you'll probably see McLean on the field a lot. And he is a really talented young cornerback, too. He was a 7th-round pick a few years ago for, I think, Carolina, and then landed in Atlanta, and he has been there for a few seasons. And so he's good in coverage. He's very fast, and he's had a few really nice interceptions, really timely interceptions. So he has, a good handle on that too. So he's a fun player to watch.
We're not going to see Julio Jones playing defense again.
Well, you might. He had a near pick in the end zone last week. That would have been his second of his career. I was sorry that he didn't pull that off.
He seemed pretty annoyed with himself.
Yeah, that was something, all right.
Well, okay, so there's not much of a pass rush, but the interior is relatively strong. But the Vikings' offensive line is, I think the best word might be, a mess. So, I mean, Matt Khalil, I don't know if you've been following my Twitter feed at all, but I've been maybe a little bit too aggressive in attacking Khalil. But, I mean, he was, 4th overall pick. We would have picked him 3rd if we didn't trade anyway. He had a really good rookie year, and then, the next 2 years, last year was poor, and this year has been, really bad. He's rated as the worst tackle by Pro Football Focus. I think anybody, who doesn't trust Pro Football Focus, but, watches the broadcast or even just the All-22 probably agrees with that assessment. And then, beyond that, you've got Charlie Johnson, who's probably a below average guard, if not worse. John Sullivan, a really strong, very good center. But the people on either side of him are a little bit questionable because Brandon Fusco is just put on IR. Vlad Koss over with the New York Jets was terrible and did not do well when Brandon Fusco left the game. Then you got Phil Lodeholt, who for the last 2 years, probably one of the better right tackles in the NFL, but this year has not been playing anything like that. So given the state of the Vikings offensive line, which is discombobulated, you're doing very poorly, do you think you'll probably end up getting more of those sacks that you've so desperately needed?
I do. And I do think that while the Falcons won't probably get consistent pressure, I think that they will get to Bridgewater some.
Okay.
Now, the nice thing for you guys is that Bridgewater does have the ability to move around some, and so that does make him a more difficult target to bring down.
Yeah, well, his strength, I mean, and your husband probably knows his strength coming out of the draft was his ability to sense pressure and react to it pretty spectacularly at times. So,
which I suppose could bring us to this. What can we, Arif? What can we expect from Bridgewater and from our offense on Sunday?
Yeah, well, I think I think with the way the Jeanna's talked about this defense, unless the defense, ends up putting together, unless Mike Nolan puts together a particularly complex defensive scheme, which I don't think I actually saw over the last, which is not to say it wasn't effective, but, not particularly complex over the past 3 weeks. I think Bridgewater is probably going to try and target those linebackers in coverage, in particular. Unfortunately, Kyle Rudolph's out, so that's probably the best way to do it. But in particular, see if Rhett Ellison has catching chops. I mean, he's been able to catch the ball decently well, but mostly as an outlet option. Or see what Marquise Gray can do. See if his 3 weeks here have been good. Or just start sending slot receivers over the middle. Jarius Wright and Greg Jennings. I don't mind that this young defensive backcourt is particularly doing well right now, because when you've got a guy like Greg Jennings, at some point experience is just going to win out sometimes. Not always, and maybe not even usually, but sometimes he's just going to break free because he's a veteran who is an extraordinarily good route runner. So I think probably Jennings is going to get more targets. Against someone like Cordero Patterson, for all his size, agility, speed, everything that's amazing about him, for some reason he doesn't deal with physicality as well as someone his size should. And, it sounds like it's a relatively physical, defensive backfield. Maybe not quite the same as the Saints in terms of physicality, but also the Saints have a bad secondary, so it's not really as important.
Right.
But here, you've got really competitive, aggressive guys that are willing to engage in press coverage, push people off routes. So, I don't know how Cordero Patterson's going to do unless he's schemed with the ball in his hands. We're seeing less and less of the jet sweeps after the first 2 weeks in the NFL. We'll probably see something relatively similar to it, either end around, a rocket sweep, a jet sweep, whatever. So in terms of pursuit, what do you see out of the Falcons in a situation where Cordero Patterson has the ball, he's hitting the corner, and he's got a little bit of open space?
Yeah, those are the kind of plays that they're really susceptible to. And so, the issue is you've got a decent amount of speed in the defensive backfield, but not in the linebacker core. And so, you just have to, the Falcons just have to hope that their guys take good angles, because they do have some speed. It's just taking good angles, closing the gap and bringing them down. But those are the kind of plays that they have been really susceptible to. So that is not ideal from my perspective.
Don't worry, it only happened like 4 times in the game. So, although Norv and Zimmer have been talking about, or have been asked why Patterson wasn't involved in the last game's running attack, and we get the feeling that this is probably going to be changing for the rest of the season.
Well, I would imagine,
since Adrian is out for the foreseeable future.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is actually a pretty good question, I think. So you have seen probably, I don't know why I'm saying that, you might have seen Jerick McKinnon. I mean, it's not like he played for a high-level school in Georgia, but you might have seen Jerick McKinnon a little bit down in Georgia. You've probably heard about him because
I have heard about him, and he was a guy that some of our readers were really interested in the Falcons potentially bringing in.
So he's, in terms of being a running back, not that running backs are as technically demanding as say a cornerback or a receiver, but for a running back he's pretty raw. You might not end up getting a lot of the snaps. That might end up being Matt Asiata, whatever the case is. Based on sort of maybe, what you've gathered from the readers, based on sort of the hype he had developed at the Combine for probably being one of the 2 best players there at the Combine anyway. Are you worried about a player like Jerick McKinnon, or do you think, with the offensive line troubles that the Vikings are having, with how decent the interior of the defensive line is for the Falcons, is there a concern for you there?
Yeah, I don't think that it's an overwhelming concern. Seeing how the Bengals were able to gouge the Falcons, I'm always a little bit worried about them giving up plays on the ground. But they were much.
Bernard's a bit better than anybody the Vikings have.
Yeah,
just a bit.
Yeah, he is better than a lot of running backs in this league. So yeah, I'm not overly worried about it. No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would talk about Matt Asiata, but I'm so over him
It must be such an adjustment for you guys. I mean, that's just been such a strength of your offense, and so that is a real challenge. I am very sorry about that.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
No, it's unusual.
Just a little different.
I was actually talking about this yesterday on the Falcons PF Central podcast. It's not just like a change in how the offense works. It's kind of like the offensive identity. It's not that we were just good at running the ball. It's that running the ball allowed the rest of the offense to do so many things. I mean,
yes.
You take a look at how bad Ponder and Castle were last year, and Freeman, I guess. And the Vikings still ranked 14th in points per drive. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we know why, right? It was because of a player like Adrian Peterson. So adjusting its offense to make Patterson and Bridgewater the faces of the franchise, to make the passing game so central, it's unusual. I mean, Vikings fans are cheering for the passing game, which before they tolerated it, and it's weird. I mean, the Falcons went through a small change of their offensive identity, but I don't think it was anything like this.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The last time that we had something like this would have obviously been 2007 with Vic and the and all of those shenanigans. Right. And that it destroyed the team for a season, and it led to hiring Mike Smith and drafting Matt Ryan, and it ushered in the most successful period of Falcons history. So a lot of good came out of it.
There's a bit of a, and it produced the best Mike Zimmer quote of all time. Have you seen it?
I love him forever. I will love him forever for what he said about Bobby Petrino.
For those that have not heard it, can we get that for the podcast here?
He came in and he resigned, and he would talk to us all at a later date. Walked out of the offense as no one has ever talked to him since. Not that anybody wanted to. He's a gutless bastard. Quote that. I don't give a shit. And so the newspaper man responded saying that they might not be able to use the word bastard. So Zimmer responded, how about this? Gutless motherfucker. You can use that. and then he just kept going. He is a coward. Put that in quotes. He ruined a bunch of people's lives, a bunch of people's families, kids, because he didn't have enough nuts to stay there and finish the job. That's the truth.
Yeah, and I mean, it is the truth. That's the business. When you're a coach that if you're an assistant or if you're a coordinator, that your career is tied to the head coach's career. And so what you do is you do your best to make sure that your head coach doesn't get fired. And he didn't even give them that opportunity.
Right.
Blank would not have fired Petrino. He would have let him continue coaching in 2008, because if you lose he came there to coach Michael Vick, and then he didn't have Michael Vick. And, you've got Joey Harrington and Chris Redmond and even Byron Leftwich starting at quarterback. Everybody knows that it's not your fault that you've only won 4 games. Like, it's not surprising. Everybody expects it. And so Blank would have given him another year. Everybody's jobs were safe. And then he snuck out under cover of darkness to take the job at Arkansas. And so everything Zimmer said is true. He did. He brought all those people there, and then he did ruin them. He ruined their families. He made them have to uproot again, find other jobs. It's a horrible thing to do. It is gutless. He was absolutely right. And he's my favorite non-Mike Smith head coach in this league.
Right. Well, so I heard Petrino, not to harp on the 2007 Falcons too much, but I heard Petrino left Post-it notes in the locker room. Was that right?
Actually, it was Xeroxed. He had written it on a piece of paper, and he had somebody make copies of it for him. He didn't even do it himself. And then I'm totally serious. It was after a game, so it was 3 a.m. It was after a night game. Late at night, he had this person, make the copies, put them in the locker, everybody's lockers, and then that was it. So he didn't even do that himself, and then he was just gone. And so when the players got there in the morning, that's what
he just didn't show up the next morning. That was it.
Yeah, that was it. And so it was really crazy. I mean, who does that? What grown man does that? It still doesn't make any sense.
Well, but there's a connection here for you, because now he's coaching Louisville again, and your husband.
Yeah.
Oh,
My husband's parents got him the signed ball back when Petrino was
right,
originally coaching
right,
Louisville. And then, they were really, when he came to Atlanta, I was not excited. My husband was not excited because we knew he was always
right.
taking meetings about the next coaching job when he was at Louisville. He wasn't committed to that job. We
Oh,
didn't.
really?
Yeah, no. And I mean, he would have like secret meetings at the airport across the river in Indiana and things like
Oh,
that.
God.
Yeah, so he was always just slimy. And so we weren't thrilled about him being here, but we thought maybe he'd be good. And it certainly seemed like he was well suited to work with Vic. So there was
Right.
potential there. And then, so my in-laws were like, well, now, you've got this signed ball and now he's the Falcons coach. That's so exciting. Well, then, then he left.
And then the ball gets stabbed
Well,
in the cover of darkness.
well, it's up in the closet, and my husband actually got it down, sent a picture of it to his parents because, like, he's like, "Hey, remember this when he got rehired?" He's like, "Hey, this is relevant again." It has like an inch of dust on it.
Well, so how's your husband taking the hiring at Luwick? I mean, because he did well, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's a good coach, and I expect that he'll turn the program around and start winning again. They haven't been that great this year,
Mm-hmm.
He said he just doesn't expect him to stay that long this time either, so it really isn't worth getting too upset about. So he's taking it in stride.
So how does this game end? What are we looking at for a final score? And I swear to God, if one of you says a missed field goal, I'm ending this call right now.
We don't have to talk about it. There's no reason for you to have brought that up. We could have gone through the entire podcast without talking about the crazy season that actually both of those.
I don't know what you're talking about. I just said a missed field goal. I'm just as just a way of a game ending. I'm just throwing that out as a potential. I'm not putting a year on it or anything.
Well, okay, so if that's all you're talking about, all I'll talk about is what a weird year for Chris Chandler. That's so unusual. Who knew he had it in him?
I don't even think he knew.
Final score predictions.
I'm gonna say 24-21 Falcons.
That is so generous of you.
I have high hopes for Teddy.
I mean, I do too. He does have to work with the rest of that offense, which includes an offensive line and a running back who are those in name only. That's too harsh. But I will say I'm gonna go with 31-21 Falcons.
I'm gonna have to go. I'm actually gonna flip yours around. I'm gonna go 24-21 Vikings. Mm-hmm. And the last time that I made a score prediction, I was basically laughed off the show until it actually happened.
Yeah, you actually got the prediction right.
Yeah. Everyone gave the Rams credit, and I was the one who didn't give them any. So I'm just saying I think we find a way to stick this out.
Okay.
I think it's entirely possible that we find a way to make this not suck for everyone.
All right. Well, I was just about to check Boveda's odds on the game, and
oh god,
Boveda.lv actually did not have a spread. But if I just check the historical spread, so the consensus, there's no way I'm reading this right. Hold on, that was wrong. It was like -3 for the Falcons. Come on. No, it's -3 for the Falcons.
Yeah, earlier in the week, I believe it was -2, but it's up to -3.
Great. I guess the Sharps have a relative amount of faith in the Vikings. The over/under is 47. Real quick, Jeanna, what's your take? Is the final score? I mean, you did make a final score prediction, but do you think that that's a reasonable over/under, 47 total points, and do you think are you confident that they'll hit the under?
The potential of the Falcons offense, I think that they could hit the over.
Okay.
It just depends on how well they play on the road. That's really what it comes down to. So, we've only seen Teddy for about half a game, so we don't really know what to expect from him either. So it is kind of hard to really gauge how they'll do. I'm going to still say that they'll hit the under, but I think
you think there's a lot of potential to hit the over. Yeah.
I do. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because your score prediction almost identically matched Vegas. And at 24-21, you got a 3-point spread, which is exactly what Vegas has. And at an over-under of 47, yours was at 45. Yeah, it's pretty close. So really, you just did Vegas one below on both of them. So
which is funny because I don't understand any of the betting stuff. So that was completely an accident.
Well, now
and once again,
the money consensus.
And once again, this information is not to be construed as gambling advice as per the ending of our show.
Yeah, we would never do that.
Well, Jeanna, do you have anything to plug for us?
Well, I actually do have one thing. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to sit down with Mike Ken. He's a former Falcons offensive lineman, and he is a Hall of Fame candidate for 2015. And I did an interview with him. It's really fascinating. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there just about NFL history. He was NFLPA president for 8 years, so there's a lot of stuff about that. So there's some non-Falcons related things. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, go to thefalcoholic.com and check that out.
All right.
And we will include a link to that in our show notes.
Right.
Thanks a lot for coming on and dropping knowledge on the Falcons. And hope we're looking for a good game.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good luck on Sunday.
And unlike quarterback Matt Castle, this episode of Norse Code has effortlessly gone long. We will return tomorrow with part 2 of episode 50, containing all of our regular features, the number of the week, wildly irresponsible prognostications, and the mailbag, as well as a brief roundup of the latest on Adrian Peterson and some other news from around the league. Thanks again to our guest, Jeanna Thomas from Falcoholic.com. She is at Jeanna Thomas on Twitter, Jeanna Thomas. Please give her a follow. You can also visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, and check out the updated links to Norse Code on iTunes and Stitcher, so you can subscribe to the show and have it delivered to your device of choice every week. Don't forget to click the little PayPal donate button at the bottom of the page and contribute your $5 if you think this show is worth it. We are confident that Norse Code truly is the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, and we think $5 for a lifetime subscription is more than fair. But we are such nice guys that we won't even force you to pay it. It would be nice, though. You can find the show on Twitter at NorseCodeDN. Make sure you follow us this weekend if you're going to the Falcons game on Sunday at TCF Bank Stadium, as our producer James is going to be there giving away Vikings hats signed by our very own Arif Hassan and revealing where to get your hat on the Norse Code Twitter account. James's personal Twitter account is at Big Mono. You can find Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. My Twitter handle is at Norse Code Dusty for any and all interested followers. And for Jeanna, James, and Arif, my name is Dusty O'Connell, and this has been part 1 of episode 50 of Norse Code, where our formula is this: Christian Ponder sucks. See you tomorrow. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SBNation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.